Okay, so you're here to get smarter faster, right? To cut through all the noise and actually like get it without having to spend hours doing your own digging. Well, that's what this is all about. And today we're diving deep into something pretty wild, a declassified CIA project from the 1960s called Acoustic Kitty.
And we're going to explore the ins and outs of this really unique espionage attempt using, well, four-legged agents.
That's right, cats.
Yeah, our mission is to like really uncover what was the thinking behind this, what was he hoping to achieve, and ultimately what made it such a strange chapter in intelligence history.
And for this deep dive, you've shared some fascinating material with me, primarily the Wikipedia page on Acoustic Kitty, which gives us a really good overview of this operation. So, okay, let's unpack this. The 1960s Cold War tensions are super high,
Oh, yeah.
and the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, which, for those of you unfamiliar, was the branch specifically exploring new tech for spying, comes up with cats as secret agents.
It's crazy.
I mean, you almost wouldn't believe it if it wasn't documented.
It does sound like something out of a spy spoof today, doesn't it?
Right.
But I mean, when you think about the geopolitical climate back then, the intense pressure to gain any advantage over the Soviet Union,
Oh, yeah.
it seems like even the most unconventional ideas were worth exploring. The core objective, as our source tells us, was to use these specially modified cats to eavesdrop on conversations within the Kremlin and Soviet embassies.
So like, picture this, right? A seemingly random cat just strolling around, totally inconspicuous,
Right.
but all the while, it's picking up sensitive information for the CIA. Here's where it gets really interesting, the technological side of things. We're not talking about just like attaching a recording device to a cat.
No.
This was a full-blown internal modification.
Indeed, according to the information we have, a veterinary surgeon performed an hour-long operation to implant a microphone directly into the cat's ear canal, which from a technical standpoint makes sense for capturing audio. But then they also placed a small radio transmitter at the base of the skull, and they threaded a thin wire into its fur to like connect everything. And you have to keep in mind, this was the 1960s. Miniaturization of electronics was still in its early stages.
Right.
So implanting even a small microphone and transmitter into a cat would have been a huge technical undertaking, likely pushing the boundaries of what was possible back then. Just the power source for the transmitter alone would have been a big hurdle.
It's astonishing, really. I mean, you have to think about the ingenuity, the sheer audacity of it all. A tiny mic, a transmitter, like something right out of a Cold War thriller. And it turns out there was a bit of a snag early on, a very feline problem
Yeah.
that needed addressing.
Yeah, the source material mentions issues with distraction.
Distraction.
Yeah. So the cat's natural instincts, especially hunger, kept interfering with its ability to do its job.
Ah, so they couldn't stay focused on the task.
Yeah, so believe it or not, there was a second surgery to try to curb the cat's appetite.
Really?
That's a detail that I think really points to the challenges of trying to use a living creature, in a technological framework for intelligence gathering.
That's amazing. I mean, you could just imagine the conversations at CIA headquarters, right?
Right.
The tech works perfectly, but the agent keeps getting sidetracked by a passing bird or a squirrel or something.
Right, exactly.
So all this whole thing with the surgeries, the special tech,
Yeah.
it couldn't have been cheap. So what kind of price tag are we talking about for this project, Acoustic Kitty?
Well, according to Victor Marchetti, a former CIA officer, the estimated cost was around $20 million.
$20 million.
That's a lot of money. And when you consider that kind of investment, you start to really see how the paranoia and the perceived stakes of the Cold War drove these agencies to really consider even the most outlandish ideas. It really shows the resources they were willing to put in to get even a slight perceived advantage.
For that kind of money, you'd hope for some pretty amazing intelligence, right? So tell us about the first real-world test.
Okay, so the first mission, as described in our source, was to eavesdrop on two men in a park near the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
They were just having a conversation, and the plan was to release the cat nearby and allow it to secretly record what they were saying.
Okay, and what happened?
Well, the initial report states that the cat was released and almost immediately hit by a taxi and reportedly killed.
Oh my gosh.
Very super.
No, it's almost too absurd to be true. After all that planning and invasive surgery, the mission ends in such a mundane way, it's almost comical. It really emphasizes the unpredictability of these kinds of operations.
So wait a minute, the first Acoustic Kitty agent was roadkill.
Well, according to that initial report, yes. But there is another account that offers a slightly different perspective on what happened.
Okay, I am all ears. So Robert Wallace, a former director of the CIA's Office of Technical Service, offered an alternate narrative in 2013. He claimed the project wasn't ended because of the cat's death, but because of the difficulty in training a cat to behave in a predictable way in an intelligence gathering scenario.
So instead of a sudden tragic end, Wallace suggests that, well, you can't really train a cat to be a good spy, huh?
Exactly. He stated that the equipment was removed, the cat was resewn.
Resewn.
Yeah.
Ah.
And then lived out a long and happy life. So it's a much less dramatic, maybe more believable conclusion for the first and possibly only operational deployment of Acoustic Kitty.
Hmm. So we have these two very different stories about that first mission, one ending with a bang, or rather a thud,
Right.
on a Washington street, the other with, a purr and a nap and a sunbeam. But did they try again? What does the source material tell us about other attempts?
Well, it indicates that subsequent tests also didn't work out. It seems like the challenges they encountered in that first mission, whether because of the cat's unpredictable nature or the taxi incident, they weren't easily overcome.
And so they scrapped the whole thing.
Well, yeah. The project was considered a failure. Our source actually says a total loss, which is interesting because there are whispers of other accounts suggesting it may have had some limited success.
Really?
Yeah, although our main source doesn't get into specifics about those.
So, okay, regardless of those potential and unconfirmed successes, Acoustic Kitty officially came to an end in 1967.
Mm-hmm.
So after all that, all the investment, the surgery, well, I guess, cat wrangling, the CIA called it quits. What was the official reason?
Well, the closing memorandum from the CIA researchers gives a more pragmatic explanation than just a series of unfortunate events involving felines.
Okay.
They said that they believe that they could train cats to move within short distances. But environmental and security factors in using this technique in a real foreign situation, they said, made it impractical for intelligence purposes.
So you're saying it was one thing to get a cat to go from point A to point B in the lab,
Right.
maybe even with all that tech on board.
Right.
But sending it out into the real world of a foreign city and expecting it to go to the right place at the right time, get useful intel without, well, getting distracted or scared or run over, that was just too much.
Exactly. And the memo really highlights the limitations of trying to force a biological system to operate within a technological intelligence gathering framework. It wasn't simply about whether the tech worked in theory, it was about whether the whole concept would work in the real world.
And the world didn't even know about this until, what, decades later?
Right, it was highly classified for many years. It wasn't until 2001, when some CIA documents related to Acoustic Kitty were declassified, that this very strange chapter in espionage history was made public.
So let's recap. We had this incredibly ambitious, crazy CIA project in the 1960s. The goal: turning cats into spies using pretty advanced surgical technology.
Yeah, it's wild.
Implanted microphones, transmitters, even surgery to manage their appetites. And it cost about $20 million.
That's right. And we looked at the conflicting accounts of the first mission, the story of the first agent being hit by a taxi versus the later story of it being retired and living out its days peacefully.
Right.
We also talked about how other attempts to use Acoustic Kitty failed to produce the desired results, leading to its cancellation in 1967.
And in the end, it wasn't some big spy disaster that killed the project, but just the basic fact that using cats in this way was impractical for real-world intelligence gathering.
Right.
And all of this was kept secret until the early 2000s. What a story.
It really makes you wonder what other seemingly crazy approaches might have been explored in the world of intelligence gathering. What are the limits of applying sophisticated technology to living beings?
So the next time you see a cat just wandering around, you might want to take a second look. Is it just a cat? Or is it thinking more? Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.